A triumphal progress to number 10. Tony Blair leads Labour in from the cold. When the curtain falls, it's time to get off the stage. John Major prepares to bow out. Sinn Féin takes 2 Westminster seats with an increased share of the vote. Another big drop has been recorded in the number of people in work here. Good evening and welcome. Seldom do dreams outdo expectations, but it was the night of nights for Tony Blair's New Labour. They swept to victory with the biggest majority in the party's history, and today the Blair family is the new tenants at number 10. Pragmatic and gracious in defeat, John Major announced his intention of stepping down from the Tory leadership. His Conservative Party is now without a representative in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland. A look at the final state of the parties. Labour took 419 seats. The Conservatives have lost more than half their MPs and now stand at 165. The Liberal Democrats have taken 46 seats and other parties 29. Looking at the changes since the 92 election, as you can see, a dramatic improvement in Labour's fortunes. Conservative representation more than halved, and the Liberal Democrats have more than doubled their representation.
Through the past 18 years, this must have been the day that many in the Labour Party thought they'd never live to see. Tony Blair had just been to Buckingham Palace, where Queen Elizabeth had formally invited him to form a government. It took him and his wife, Cherie, several minutes to work their way the short distance from the gates of Downing Street to the door of number 10, the street packed with Labour supporters and their children. The fatigue of the grueling 6-week campaign seemed to fall away as he stood in front of the door.
I know all too well the huge responsibility that is upon me and the great trust that the British people have placed in me.
And there was this tribute to the loser.
For his dignity and his courage over these last few days, and for the manner of his leaving, the essential decency of which is the mark of the man.
Tony Blair moved into Downing Street less than 2 hours after John Major had moved out. Around the back of the building, the removal van was still being loaded. It was paid for by the Majors themselves. As he left Downing Street, John Major announced he'd be standing down as Tory party leader.
When the curtain falls, it's time to get off the stage, and that is what I propose to do. I shall therefore advise my parliamentary colleagues that I believe that it would be appropriate for them to consider the selection of a new leader of the Conservative Party to lead the party through opposition during the years that lie immediately ahead.
And with that, he left Downing Street to tender his resignation to the Queen and then go to the Oval to watch a cricket match for the afternoon. While the media waited outside, Prime Minister Blair was inside making his first cabinet appointments. No surprises in today's names. Gordon Brown is the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, Robin Cook, Foreign Secretary. Labour Party Deputy Leader John Prescott becomes Deputy Prime Minister. Margaret Beckett goes to the Department of Trade and Industry, David Blunkett to Education, and the new Home Secretary is Jack Straw. Tony Blair hasn't moved in properly yet. For the youngest Prime Minister in 185 years, the new job title will obviously take some time to get used to.
Prime Minister, have a few words, please.
By 6:30, he was on his way back to his North London home for dinner with his family.
The massive scale of the Conservative defeat has left that party traumatised. Now it faces further trouble in the shape of a leadership contest, a battle that will pitch the pro- and anti-Europe factions one against the other. So devastating were the results of the polls that some of those who yesterday were contenders to challenge for the leadership are today out of Westminster.
Wipeout, meltdown, disaster. This was the biggest Conservative defeat for 150 years, their lowest share of the vote since 1906. And as if one bloody battle wasn't enough, the party now faces another, following John Major's announcement that he's stepping down as party leader. First to throw his hat into the ring in the succession stakes is the former Chancellor Ken Clarke, the leading pro-European in the Major cabinet. But what about the others? Last night, leading Tories were falling like ninepins. 24 hours ago, Michael Portillo was tipped as the main right-wing challenger for the leadership. Today, he's an ex-member of Parliament, losing his seat to Labour.
A truly terrible night for the Conservatives.
He wasn't the only top Tory to get the boot. William Waldegrave, Tony Newton and Roger Freeman, all cabinet ministers, all lost their seats. The 3 Scots in cabinet also lost. The most senior victim, the Foreign Secretary Malcolm Rifkind. The President of the Board of Trade, Ian Lang, fell victim to a resurgent Scottish Nationalist Party. And the Scottish Secretary, Michael Forsyth, also lost. In fact, every single Tory MP in Scotland lost their seat last night. And as of today, there are no Tory MPs in Wales either. The Conservatives have been reduced to a minority party based in England. And even in England, the big names fell. David Mellor, Edwina Currie and the Eurosceptic ex-Chancellor Norman Lamont are all out. The only winners apart from Labour are the Liberal Democrats, who almost doubled their MPs. Paddy Ashdown now leads the biggest third party at Westminster since the 1930s.
The Liberal Democrats now are a force that guarantees the modernisation of our constitution in the next 3 or 4 years, and for that reason I believe that the next Parliament will indeed be a momentous and historical one.
The other big winner was war correspondent Martin Bell. His anti-sleaze campaign ousted Neil Hamilton, the Tory MP at the centre of the so-called Cash for Questions scandal.
I believe this is a proud moment for the people of Tatton, though I have to say a rather humbling one for me. I did not do this, you did it. It was not my victory, it was your victory.
And one more likely casualty, the party chairman Brian Mulwhiney, who will be scapegoated for the Tories' defeat.
With so few Conservative MPs in the new Parliament and with so many big names losing their seats, the leadership race is wide open. Our special correspondent Charlie Bird has been looking at the possible contenders.
The furniture vans had hardly left Downing Street when the first candidate declared for the Tory leadership. Kenneth Clarke, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer and staunch pro-European, was the first to throw his hat in the ring. Michael Portillo, the man who many on the Tory right believed would have been a strong contender for the job, was one of the main casualties last night. So in his absence, another Eurosceptic and former challenger for the post, John Redwood, is now believed to be one of the favourites from the right of the party. While he still hasn't thrown his hat in the ring, most commentators feel he will. Now in his mid-60s, Michael Heseltine has twice challenged for the post. Some say that his heart attack a few years ago and now the prospect of a major job in industry will persuade him not to put his name forward. But some of his close friends say that Mr. Heseltine still has a burning ambition to become Prime Minister. There are a number of other possible contenders, the former Home Secretary Michael Howard and also Stephen Dorrell. And the name of Chris Tatton shouldn't be forgotten. Now about to leave his job as Governor of Hong Kong and a possible move by John Major to the House of Lords could allow Chris Tatton back into the House of Commons and in a position to challenge for the leadership of the party.
Well, turning now to the elections in the north, here the main news was the election of Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness of Sinn Féin at the expense of the SDLP's Joe Hendren and the DUP's William McRae. The Ulster Unionists now have 10 seats. That's one up since 1992. The SDLP lost 1 seat, leaving them with 3. The Democratic Unionists and Sinn Féin now both have 2 seats and 1 for the UK Unionists. Despite having 8% of the overall vote, the Alliance Party failed to win a seat. Martin McGuinness in Mid-Ulster was 4 percentage points ahead of the Reverend William McRae of the DUP, who had been given a clear run by the Ulster Unionist Party. This was one of only 2 constituencies where an outgoing MP lost his seat, in both cases to Sinn Féin.
The new MP for Mid-Ulster, Sinn Féin's Martin McGuinness. He asked the Nationalists to vote tactically, and they did. He overturned the Reverend William McRae's majority of 6,000 and became the first Nationalist to win the seat since 1969.
20,294.
The SDLP's Dennis Haughey polled a disappointing 11,000 votes. It was a bitter election in the North's most polarised constituency. The outgoing MP, the Reverend William McRae, beaten by 1,800 votes, refused to share the same platform as Sinn Féin.
And you know, when you lie down with the dogs, you rise with the fleas. Sad to say the people of Northern Ireland will have to suffer.
Despite their abstentionist policy, Martin McGuinness said he would represent his constituents in London.
Well, we will not take the oath of allegiance to the British Queen, and we will not accept the right of the British government to rule over this part of Ireland. But we will go to Westminster and we will demand that we be treated as first-class MPs representing a first-class electorate.
With the 60% nationalist majority, it was thought the new constituency of West Tyrone would return either Sinn Féin's Pat Doherty or the SDLP's Joe Byrne. In the event, the nationalist vote split down the middle, both receiving just over 14,000 votes. So it was a historic win for Ulster Unionist Willie Thompson, who beat his rivals by 2,000 votes.
While elected, of course, as a Unionist, I will seek to represent all of the people in this constituency to the best of my ability.
No surprises in Fermanagh South Tyrone. Ken McGuinness took over 50% of the vote in a constituency which has a slight nationalist majority. Even so, like many unionists in the north this evening, he was bitterly disappointed Sinn Féin had polled well. They took 23% in Fermanagh South Tyrone.
I'm disappointed that there are 23% of the electorate who have voted to sanction the murder of their Protestant neighbours and the murder of members of the Roman Catholic tradition who may dissent from the men of violence. But we will deal with that as we have dealt with it over 25 years within both traditions, courageously, not flinching before the bomb and the bullet.
Gerry Adams said his victory represented a demand for the urgent restoration of the peace process, but he wouldn't say whether he'd be using his mandate to call on the IRA to renew its ceasefire. Sinn Féin had been expecting to retake West Belfast. In the event, Mr Adams secured more than 24,000 votes, a majority of almost 8,000 over outgoing MP Joe Hendren of the SDLP.
There was a champagne celebration for Gerry Adams on the steps of Belfast City Hall as Republicans celebrated what they see as a vintage victory for Sinn Féin in West Belfast. The party's vote increased substantially, leaving Gerry Adams 8,000 votes ahead of the sitting MP, Dr Joe Hendren. The SDLP man, gracious in defeat, still polled well, benefiting from the support of thousands of Unionist voters in the Shankill. Mr Adams said he now expected the new British government to quickly recognise his electoral mandate.
Well, I would expect as MP for West Belfast that the new secretary would respect the outcome of this election. It's an election in which everyone had their say. It was a wide choice of candidates. The people have spoken, and I would presume that inclusiveness is the key word and the keystone of any forward movement.
After the result, several hundred Sinn Féin supporters marched through the city centre en route to Republican West Belfast. The three remaining Belfast seats went predictably enough to the sitting Unionist MPs. Peter Robinson of the DUP retained East Belfast, seeing off challenges from the Ulster Unionist Reg MP and from Dr Joe Hendren's brother Jim, standing for alliance. However, the DUP MP cut short his victory speech, leaving the podium in protest at the presence of a Sinn Féin candidate. Ulster Unionist, the Reverend Martin Smith, held South Belfast ahead of the SDLP, while David Irvine of the Loyalist PUP polled a highly respectable 5,700 votes. North Belfast was also retained by the Ulster Unionists, Cecil Walker holding off the challenges of both Sinn Féin and the SDLP.
The two main Unionist parties have seen little change in their representation at Westminster. The Ulster Unionists have one extra MP, the DUP one less.
With the bonus of a new MP in Westminster, David Trimble had comprehensively held off the challenge from the Democratic Unionists today, even if his own personal vote was down, reflecting the presence of a DUP candidate in Upper Bann. He blamed Dr Paisley's party and the Alliance for an ill-tempered campaign.
Regrettably, in this election, we have seen a level of personal vituperation that I have not witnessed before in Northern Ireland politics for decades. And that vituperation was a sustained attack by certain parties, plural, on the Ulster Unionist Party. And that attack has failed.
And he saw the hand of the Irish government in Sinn Féin's success in West Belfast and Mid-Ulster.
I don't see them as significant. They're simply a result of the way in which the seats were gerrymandered, largely as a result of the pressure illegitimately brought by the Irish government through the Anglo-Irish agreement to have the seats, particularly the Belfast seats, drawn so as to help Mr Adams. Now that is of course quite illegitimate for the Irish government to interfere, quite wrong for Sir Patrick Mayhew to connive at the gerrymander.
While John Hume saw the Sinn Féin victories as an opportunity to further the peace process.
Violence not only has no contribution to make to our problem, it makes our problem worse because it deepens the divisions among our people. Therefore, I hope that the IRA are using their heads now and will leave their guns down forever, and that Sinn Féin will come to the table with the rest of us and with the two governments and begin the task of achieving lasting peace and lasting stability by achieving lasting agreement.
Dr Ian Paisley's declaration in North Antrim was a typically rumbustious affair, with the DUP leader taunting the SDLP's Sean Farron. As the returning officer waited to give out the official result, the row spread to involve the Alliance candidate.
May have no votes, but that's a disgraceful remark, Dr Paisley. Sorry.
Well, you're an Irish Republican. Come back to...
Please, can we have some decorum?
With the loss of Willie McRae, Dr Paisley's party is now on equal terms with Sinn Féin at Westminster. Peter Robinson acknowledged that Mr McRae would have to find a new base if he was to return.
But he was living in an area that undoubtedly it was a borrowed seat. There was a massive nationalist majority, and simply the arithmetic of it meant that he was only going to hold on for a certain length of time. I regret that he has gone, but he will be back.
Elsewhere in North Down, Bob McCartney, the leader of the UK Unionist Party, saw off a challenge from the Ulster Unionists for his seat.
Our Northern editor, David Davenport, joins us now from Belfast. David, an interesting day in Northern Ireland. How has the political landscape altered?
Well, certainly the landscape at Westminster has altered, and we have 3 new MPs, if you count Gerry Adams, who has, of course, already served 2 terms. But we have Martin McGuinness to accompany him for Sinn Féin, and we have William Thompson in West Tyrone. Now, while that may seem like something of a political earthquake in Northern Ireland, where changes don't happen very often, if you look at the popular vote, it hasn't actually changed all that much. The nationalist vote has certainly been maximised, partially because of the fine weather yesterday, but mainly because of the hotly contested seats, particularly those west of the Bann.
And we're assuming we're about to have the first woman Northern Secretary. How do you see Mo Mowlam's priorities?
Well, she's certainly going to be a change in style from Sir Patrick Mayhew, there's no doubt about that. You can't imagine a more dramatic change in political gear than Mo Mowlam supplanting Sir Patrick Mayhew. Her first priority will have to be the marching season and how to deal with Drumcree, which is approaching without very much sign of success in efforts to mediate a settlement there. That will be her very first priority. After that, she will have to grapple with the political situation, and she'll have to assess what the prospects of a renewed IRA ceasefire in the short term really are.
David, thank you for that. And then we take a break. Coming next in the 9 o'clock news, the big fall in the unemployment election and Prime Minister Blair. His new position obviously has implications for the rest of his family, for his wife Sherry and his 3 children.
They're not calling him Bambi any longer. Now it's Prime Minister. And as Labour Party workers and friends gathered outside number 10 Downing Street under a cloudless sky, savouring the party's biggest ever victory, there was a sense that Tony Blair represented far more than a change of government. The youngest Prime Minister this century, Tony Blair hugged and kissed his wife Shiri Booth, a successful barrister and the first working mother in Downing Street. Their children, Ewan, Nicky and Catherine, very much part of the heady atmosphere. Over the past 3 years, Tony Blair has revamped the Labour Party, discarding socialist icons that had dogged the party's electoral hopes. His campaigning style was full of energy and optimism and the promise of change. He became the face of New Labour. His image makers cashed in on Blair the family man, and he attracted voters in droves. The Blairs are expected to leave their Georgian period house in trendy Islington in North London and move into number 10. But used to lots of space, they could find the flat above the shop a bit of a squeeze, along with the rollerblades, bikes and power games. They may even decide to move next door to the more spacious number 11, traditionally occupied by the Chancellor of the Exchequer. But whatever about the domestic innovations, the voters will be looking to the new Prime Minister to put Britain's house in order.
And finally, our London correspondent Brian O'Connell joins us live. Well, Brian, the pollsters certainly got it right this time.
They did, Anne, but it depends on which polls you read. If you remember, there was one poll, the ICM poll conducted by The Guardian. That was also the poll that the Tories used, incidentally, which showed the gap between Labour and the Tories closing. It closed down at one stage to between 5-7 percentage points. Overall, they did get it right, but they were national opinion polls, and they weren't looking at individual small constituencies. For example, I was in Brent North last night, safe Tory seat. Dr. Rhodes Boyson, former Northern Ireland minister, 11,000 majority. He lost that on a swing of 13%.
Well, we've seen the euphoria. What are the first big challenges facing Tony Blair?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges facing Tony Blair is going to be Europe. He's got to go to this special emergency summit on the Intergovernmental Conference, followed very quickly afterwards by the Amsterdam summit. Now, he's committed in his manifesto and during the election campaign to signing Britain up to the social chapter. It's going to be very interesting to see how he deals with that, how he deals with other European leaders. There are some crunch issues for him, though. Fishing quotas, for example, is one. He's got to get a deal on fishing quotas. He's got to be seen to be getting Britain's way in Europe, as it were. But although he hasn't yet, as John Major did, threatened to paralyse and disrupt the outcome of the Amsterdam summit if Britain doesn't get its way. So he's got to take a hard line, but he's got to be seen to be conciliatory and pro-European as well.
Brian, it hasn't just been a marathon for the politicians, it has been for you too. Thank you for that. And that's Friday's 9 o'clock news on the day the British Labour Party swept into power in Britain with Tony Blair at their head. We leave you with a few of the memorable moments.
Kind offer for a new administration of government in this country.
Okay, we lost.